You are now listening to F&B Radio.
And welcome to F&B Radio. My name is Lindsay Collins, and I am your host. We had to get rid of our dishwasher because it had a yeast infection. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It definitely had, I'll just tell you the story. It had yeast, right? Isn't that disgusting? Like, I was ashamed, first of all. I was like, as a woman, I'm no stranger to yeast. I understand it. I know about it. I know what causes it. I know how to, not wear your bathing suit when it's wet. Turns out that can happen to your dishwasher. Like, the whole thing to me is disgusting, but it's also like annoying when it's an appliance because you can't just get it like Cascade's version of Monistat. You just apparently have to get a whole new dishwasher. And to be fair, we've had this dishwasher for like a long time, as long as we've lived in this house, which is 6 years. And I guess I realized I've never lived in a house longer than an appliance. Like, usually, in my experience, you move into a place, it has a refrigerator and a dishwasher or whatever the appliances are. And you just kind of like have them while you live there. Maybe you get them repaired, but you don't have to like see them through their entire life cycle. I've just never lived in a place that long, not in my adult life. And so I was like really confused. I was like, wait, does this just happen when dishwashers get old? It's like osteoporosis. They just can't function anymore. But I mean, it makes sense, I guess. It's a place with food that's decaying, hot water, and it seals. And it just gets humid and gross in there. But I didn't know it was yeast. I would have never in a million years been like, oh, yeah, it's probably got yeast. I was like, what's happening? Why are there black spots in the dishwasher? I was calling it mold. I was like, ew, our dishwasher has mold. It's got like summertime mold happening, which seems to happen, pretty easily in the South. Not to make us sound like disgusting people, but I'm like, we clean it out. We put some vinegar and baking soda in there from time to time and just give it a little refresh. But I never think to like clean it, I mean, not the way I would like clean my sink or clean my cabinets or even my dish disposal. I do clean that. I'll run a little baking soda and vinegar down there and just kind of slosh it around. But I thought it was mold, and I was like, wow, what is this? There's like little specks of black-looking stuff in the dishwasher. And this is just the difference between Jeremy and I, because I'm always like, I just really jump to conclusions, and I get a little dramatic with stuff where I'm like, oh my God, we have black mold. Like, and whenever you say black mold, people really get scared because that's like the bad kind. Like, there's mildew, which I think is green, is equally not good for you, but not as bad, not as fast spreading as the black mold. Then people say black mold, and you're like, that's like, you got to move type of situation, or you have to like hire an expert to handle that. But I was like, what? We have mold in our... So I just like chalked it up to black. I was like, we have black mold. And he was like, I don't know. He did some research and was like, it's an yeast overgrowth. To which I was like actually horrified by. I was like, this is worse. This is worse than black mold. For once, like the thing I thought it wasn't as bad as what it actually was. But I'm like, I've never seen, I'm like, is this normal for inexpensive bottom of the line dishwashers by Whirlpool? Like, just they live 5 years and then they just get a yeast overgrowth and that's it. You have to buy another one. That's part of their deal. But then I realized that, all the places that I've lived, I've never stayed there maybe more than two or 3 years. Not in the same place anyway. I've stayed in the same city for more than 2 or 3 years. I think maybe right at. I kind of move around. Until I got to Charleston, I was kind of nomadic. So I'm like, I think I just move around a lot. Like sometimes when the IRS is like, which of these addresses have you lived at? I'm like, honestly, I don't know. Any of them? They all seem plausible because they're like, I'm like, did I live on Meadowlark? I don't know. that could work because they don't give you the city. You know, they just give you the number and the street name when you're trying to like identify yourself on, to the IRS. Or maybe that's just anywhere. Maybe that's just like financial institutions when you're trying to get it back into your overdrawn bank account and see what's going on. They're like, could just a couple of security questions, and it's always like, did you live at this address? No, I think it is taxes. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's usually TurboTax that's asking me this, or as Jeremy used to use when him and I got together, Tax Slayer. Now that's an online platform. Is that even a thing? If you use Tax Slayer, that's right, Tax Slayer, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but for taxes. But yeah, it would ask you like, do you live at these addresses? And you're like, possibly, maybe. I can never, I'm like, I honestly probably look like a fraud every time because I'm just clicking yes to all of the options. I'm like, yeah, I probably lived on Amherst Street at some point. It's possible. I don't know. I have a really like painfully sharp memory for experiences, but addresses, not so much. So I don't know. I was just like, I've never seen this happen with dishwashers. And then in the same week, the outdoor fridge also died. The freezer died the day before skewers. It just couldn't take the heat. Literally, it was so hot. There was a heat wave that weekend, and the freezer was like packed full of shit. And I just went out there, and it was just dripping water, which is kind of like a fridge's slow death. You see it just like, its version bleeding its own blood, which is just water or condensation or something, out onto the garage floor. And so the freezer died, but the fridge was hanging on. So we were like, that's good. We can use the fridge. And then sure enough, I don't know, 2 days ago, the outdoor fridge, which is clutch in this family because we have a crazy amount of groceries happening. We're a family of 5, but we also just love to cook. And so it's like there's kind of always a lot. The outdoor fridge was mostly condiments, vermouths, drinks, that kind of stuff, but also overflow for groceries when there's like an excess or when the CSA comes in. So it was hard to say goodbye to that. And we haven't replaced that, but we did get a new dishwasher, which I was surprised to learn are not that expensive. Probably because they only last fucking 5 years and then they get a yeast infection and die. But it's been a tough week for appliances in this household because I'm like, man, could I have done something more to make it last longer? And then I started thinking and I was like, probably, because a lot of times when we leave town, like for the weekend, I'll just load all the dirty dishes in there, turn it on, and leave. And I'm like, that's 100% what caused it. I think the dishwasher would have probably lived a lot longer if I hadn't been doing that pretty much every time we leave the house for the weekend or for longer. You just leave those dishes in there, like sitting in their own steam with no way to escape it. And, that's what you get. So don't wear a wet bathing suit and don't leave your clean dishes in the dishwasher for an extended period of time. At least give it a little crack, Let some of that steam escape. Let some of that fresh air circulate. Because it was, there's 2 things you don't want to be without, but also it's like hard to cough up the money. Where you're like, this isn't even a fun purchase. This is like a necessity. Those are the worst kind of purchases because if you're going to drop a bunch of money on something, it's like, oh, heck yeah, I'm going to get a new like toy, like a Vitamix or something cool that you're excited about. But I'm like, just to get something that's just basic utility, like being like, oh, we got to replace our roof. Like that fucking sucks. It's just a punch in the stomach when you're like, what happened to the old roof? Why did it choose now? But this is what happens when you're a homeowner. It's rough, How are you? How's everything? Man, who's sick of tomatoes? Anybody? Everybody? If you're in the South, you've probably been eating tomatoes on repeat, or at least I have. And as I've said many times on this podcast, it's been an extraordinarily good tomato season in my experience, in terms of the ones I can get my hands on. They've been the best I've had in years. But all of a sudden, I've just hit the wall. Like, we got one today in the CSA, and this is no reflection on the CSA, but I looked at it and I was just like, oh, fuck. No, I don't want to eat any more tomatoes. Like, I just immediately, I really turned on them. And it was like a kind of a weird looking heirloom one, which is great. Normally I'm like, oh, beautiful. Look at all the odd shapes. But this one just looked like it had a tumor of some kind. I was like, this is just bulbous and disgusting. I hate this. I don't want to use this tomato. And that's like so unnecessary. And like, but it was like a weird shade too. It wasn't like, and now I am just really going hard on this tomato, but it was not like a red appealing or even like an orange or a yellow or like these striations of color. Like it was like just this kind of putrid looking pink color that looked sad. It just looked like it looked like it had nothing going on. This tomato looked like a poor doer. And it just was like, I've never been so repulsed by a vegetable. I was like, oh God. Because normally vegetable, like meat, you can easily be repulsed by meat, especially in the raw state, like almost exclusively in the raw state. Like every time I see a piece of raw meat, I'm just kind of like I don't want to fuck with it, especially chicken, anything really. But I'm just like, I get so grossed out by raw meat so easily. Pork, any of it. It's just nasty looking and smelling. And like, I'm always like smelling it a bunch of times just to be like, is this bad or is this just how meat smells? Because it smells bad. But that's like all meat, even like really fried. Like the butcher will hand it to me and I'm like, ugh. But then it cooks and it's like amazing and delicious and it's fine. But I think it's my least favorite thing to work with, raw meat. Like I'd rather do just about anything. But like, yeah, raw meat, shellfish, and honestly, raw any protein is kind of nasty. That's not plant-based. And then, but vegetables never gross me out. And this tomato, I like saw it and I was like, fuck this tomato. I put it on the counter and I was like, nice. Like tried to be excited about it. And maybe I'll come around. Maybe I'm just in like a bad mood today, which I am, but I don't think I'm going to come around to this tomato. And I just want you to know that that's okay. Tara Darling, who was just over here picking up all of the stuff that she so kindly let us use. And side note, at Aimwell, where Tara and John Darling have their amazing farm, it's called Aimwell, and it's not that far outside of Charleston. They're having a thing August 6th on Sunday. It's a tailgate party. You bring your own picnic. She's making pancakes all day. If you have not been up there, it's like an oasis that is just that you can't even believe you have access to. I strongly recommend reaching out to them or going to at Roman Farrow, ROAM and Farrow, FARROW, I think, or just go to their website or DM me and I'll direct you. But yeah, she's having, or there, I don't know, I only say she, but they're having a tailgate party. And it's a really cool way to experience the farm and see what they're doing out there because they have a really cool situation and membership offerings so that you can get vegetables from their farm all year long, produce, plants, flower. Like it's hard to put into words because it is so magical, but it's this beautiful property where pretty much anything is possible. And every time I go out there, I'm just in awe of the work they've put into it. And it changes every time because they're living and working on the land. So it's constantly evolving. But they had some of the most extraordinary tomatoes and I was just like swimming in them, literally a crate of tomatoes. And once I got through that crate, I was like, I think I've reached my limit. Like I'm now in a place where I'm rejecting tomatoes just for a little while, because I could never be done with them. But it's that time in the summer where you're just like, I don't even care about eating anymore. Like I always reach this point in the summer where I get super fatigued by the heat, but it translates into me just being like, I don't want to eat. I don't want to do anything. I can barely it's taking all of my energy just to try to stay cool and not burn energy and not break out into a sweat. So like cooking feels really hard. and eating even things raw, which normally is my solution. It's like, well, just have something crisp and raw and cold. And I'm like, with this broken refrigerator? I mean, yes, do I have an indoor refrigerator? Yes, I do. So I'm just basically complaining about nothing, but I've got yeast in my fucking dishwasher. I got a tumor tomato. It's just not right. It's that time in the summer where you're just fucking angry because, it's August. And like the fun parts of summer that you're like excited about, they're starting to wear thin. And you're just left with like getting through and being like, what is there to be excited? It's when people start pining away for fall and you're like, no, bitch, it's August. You better buckle up. It's going to be hot here until October. So we better just all lean in. I think that's what happens is I go too hard, in the beginning of summer, because I'm just like, it's here, it's summer, BLTs every day. And then you're like, shit, I can't eat a pound of bacon every other day. That's not working for me in any capacity. You just get kind of burnt out. And then you're like, what's left? You know what I've actually been eating? Hot soup. How insane is that? I just eat hot soup because somehow it feels like leaning in. I'm like, what? It feels like hot soup outside. So we might as well eat hot soup and then just double down. Like, it's like when you do wine pairings. It's like, let's pair like with like here. I'm not looking for any contrast. I don't want to eat something cold to make me remember how fucking hot it is outside. Let's just lean in and pretend that we're all on fire, that we're all just boiling in this vat of soup. But I've been eating soup on repeat. And that's what I do when I absolutely like can't care, is just because, I mean, honestly though, soup is a staple in our house because of its inherent properties. It's nutrient dense. It's all in one pot. It's something you can heat up and have at the ready. So I make soup all year long. This is not a summer thing. I make soup, 2 different soups probably every single week, all year long, and just have them in the fridge for like, for eating, for souping. And then the summer comes though, and you would think I would be like a gazpacho girly, but don't even get me started. I feel like I've talked about this on here before, but I don't want your gazpacho recipe. I hate gazpacho. Gazpacho feels, maybe if I went to like Italy or Spain or wherever the fuck gazpacho hails from, I would feel differently. But I've had gazpacho at like Michelin star restaurants and just been like, I'm good. It does not, it's a savory smoothie. Can we just all be honest about that? It's just a vegetable smoothie. And I love a Bloody Mary, but I cannot get down with gazpacho. And I understand that doesn't make any sense, but I don't want to make gazpacho. I don't want to have a cold soup unless it's fishy swa, which is, can we all agree, is the best cold soup. The only really cold soup that's acceptable to me. But yeah, I just have been doubling down eating hot soup. And in fact, as I'm recording this, I can smell the caramelized onions for the soup that's going to be made tonight. That's just all I can do. I'm like, well, just lean in. Let's just all get hot. Get hot and soupy. Because there's no other choice. There's no escaping the heat. You can hide in your house, but your fridge is just going to break under the weight of the crushing temperatures. And then you got to deal with that. But yeah, we're just hanging in. We're in the dog days. These are what they call the dog days of summer. And if you're like true blue South Carolinian, you know that these really aren't the dog days, that the dog days are coming in September. But this is when you start to feel it. This is when you're like just wishing you could be anywhere else. I see these people like in, Maine and Canada, and I'm like, they're really doing it. That's what people should do. I don't know why anybody would come here for the summer, but yeah, it's all going to be fine. It's been one of those rebuilding weeks where you're like, damn, I got to get my life back on track after having a really fun summer celebration, a la skewers, which, by the way, so many So many of you are still reaching out to me, and it really does blow me away. There's more exciting stuff coming up in the next couple months, so stay tuned for that. There's always something around the corner, even if it's just more hot soup. But no, I hope you're well. I hope all is well. I'm going to get my attitude right. I really am. I am. I'm sorry if I talked about yeast too much. I know I talked about yeast too much. I'm aware. But that's just what my life is like. So I can't, what am I supposed to talk about? My cold plunges? People don't want to hear that. Trust me. I don't. But I'll see you next week. You can rate and review the show. How about that? You can be like, wow, Lindsay sounded really hot and bothered. But as long as you give it 5 stars, it's fine. I'll see you next week. Bye. Bye, bye, bye.
Paraît que les ciels sont plus beaux. Un vol direct ou avec l'escale pour passer de nuit à Oslo. On enverrait des cartes postales. Je laisserai un mot sur le frigo. On déciderait de se faire la malle. Ta famille, les amis.